From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Please welcome the Librarian of Congress, Dr. James H. Billington.
Good evening and welcome to the Library of Congress. This year, in the search for our next Poet Laureate of the United States, the Library of Congress reached out to 50 nominators from around the country, critics, scholars, editors, leaders in the field, and our past Poet Laureates. We received 76 recommended names. I read through packets of poems, then poetry collections to experience their diverse talent with vision and range. But no matter whose work I was reading through, I found myself returning to the poetry of Charles Wright. Tonight, I am delighted publicly to celebrate his appointment to the nation's only federally funded position for literature. Now, this is not the first honor the library has bestowed on Mr. Wright. In 2008, we awarded him the Rebekah Bobbitt National Prize in Poetry for Lifetime Achievement. And he becomes then the only winner of the laureateship specifically for lifetime achievement in the 22-year history of the prize, as well as the third Bobbitt winner to move on to the laureateship. After Louise Gluck, W.S. Merwin, Wright has also received almost more prizes than can be mentioned: the Pulitzer Prize, National Book Award, National Book Critics Circle Award, Ruth Lilly Prize for the Poetry Foundation, and the International Griffin Poetry Prize, among many others. Former Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, Wright is currently a fellow at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and a member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers. It was as part of the fellowship that Wright recently returned to the library to participate in a reading organized by then our previous Poet Laureate, Natasha Trethewey. Wright was born in Pickwick, Tennessee, now lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, where he's Professor Emeritus of Creative Writing at the University of Virginia. His poems often turn to the world of the South for its grounding power and imagery, yet they are just as likely to return to Italy, where, while stationed there with the United States Army, Wright famously fell in love with the poetry of Ezra Pound and Italy in general. His poetry does not fit into the storytelling tradition generally associated with Southern literature, but it echoes the spiritually charged syntax of Jared Manley Hopkins and the grand reckoning of Dante's Divine Comedy. As a Librarian of Congress for 27 years and as a champion of Russian literature, I admire how Wright dedicated himself to a 30-year project. He named it the Appalachian Book of the Dead, and how he has sustained an elemental beauty in poem after poem, in gracefully meditative forms. I also appreciate the gravity of his concerns, which he states are, and I'm quoting him, language, landscape, and the idea of God, as well as his counterbalance of humility and self-deprecating humor. A poem like Ancient of Days from Wright's new book, Caribou, captures this rare alchemy. It ends with these lines that I will read not as eloquently as he will himself. This is an old man's poetry, written by someone who spent his life looking for one truth. Sorry, pal, there isn't one. Unless, of course, the trees and their blow-down relatives are part of it. Unless the late evening armada of clouds Spanished along the horizon are part of it, unless the diminishing pinprick of light stunned in the dark forest is part of it. Unless, oh my, whatever the eye makes out and sends us on its rough road trace to the heart is part of it. Then maybe that bright vanishing might be. I can say with certainty that Wright's poetry is a poetry for all ages and all times. For close to a half century, it has not only reported on what it's seen, but searched for whatever truth could be found there. The result is a music as singular, moving, and ultimately necessary as anything in our language. Please join me in welcoming Charles Wright, the 20th Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry at the Library of Congress.
Tell I'm being called. The lights are everywhere. Thank you, Dr. Billington. Thank you very much for this great honor of being here. And thank you, Rob Casper, for being inexhaustible in your help and for writing that long goddamn introduction. Thank all y'all for coming, too. I really appreciate it. One always, at times like this, wants to thank one's parents, even though they're no longer around, because you want to hear them say, "Phew, boy, that was close, wasn't it?" The poems I'm going to read are pretty much in chronological order. And the first one is called Ars Poetica, which I think means the art of poetry. I'm not really sure. I always use that stuff. Oh, it starts out, I like it back here. Well, back here, when we lived in California, was where I had a little space carved out of the back of the garage where I used to work. Or I used to tell myself I was working. Anyhow. Ars Poetica. I like it back here, under the green swatch of the pepper tree and the aloe vera. I like it because the wind strips down the leaves without a word. I like it because the wind repeats itself and the leaves do. I like it because I'm better here than I am there, surrounded by fetishes and figures of speech, dog's tooth and whale's tooth, my father's shoe, the dead weight of winter, the inarticulation of joy. The spirits are everywhere. And once I have them called down from the sky and spinning and dancing in the palm of my hand, what will it satisfy? I'll still have the voices rising out of the ground, the fallen star my blood feeds, this business I waste my heart on, and nothing stops that. Can you hear me back there? No? Oh, Jesus. Sorry, Jerry. I thought this was a microphone. Can you hear me now? No? Okay, wait a minute. Seriously, can you hear me now? Well, tough luck for you. This poem is called Mount Caribou at Night. Mount Caribou is a mountain up in Montana, northwest Montana, which can be seen from the place we go in the summer My last book was called Caribou, which was supposed to have a picture of a mountain on it. But they sent me all those horns, and I said, well, it's a nice picture, so what the hell, let's use it. Since the titles of my poems have very little to do with the poems, then the cover of my book can have little to do with the poems themselves, too. There's a little story behind this. The Yak Valley in northwest Montana is at 4,000 feet, and it really gets cold up there in the winter. This was told to me. I have no idea it was true. But years ago, a man named Walter Smoot died up there, and he was one of the very early settlers, and nobody would bury him because they all disliked him intensely for some reason. So a couple of people, 3 people I think, sat around drinking and said, what are we going to do with old Walt, for God's sakes? And I said, I don't know, I hate that son of a bitch. You know, what are we going to do? And finally, one guy, John Phelan, said, oh, hell, I'll bury the son of a bitch, let's go. So they went to this little bench, which eventually became the official cemetery for the area. And John started digging and started digging and started digging. The ground was frozen solid, of course. He was digging, and I guess the whiskey started to wear off a little bit, and he said, that's it, I've had it. Let's bury him right here. We'll bury him seated up. So they stuck him in there and put his head down over his knees and put the dirt on top of him, and there lies Walter Smoot to this day. Mount Caribou at night. Just north of the Yak River, one man sits bolt upright, a little bonnet of dirt and bunch grass above his head. Northwestern Montana is hard relief, and harder still the lying down and the rising up. I speak to the others there, lodged in their stone wedges, the blocks and slashes that vein the ground, and tell them that Walter Smoot, starched and at ease in his bony duds under the tamarack, still holds the nightfall between his knees. Work stars, drop by inveterate drop, begin Cassiopeia's sails in electric paste across the sky. And down toward the cadmium waters that carry them back to the dawn, they squeeze out Andromeda and the whale, everything on the move, everything flowing and folding back and starting again. Star slick, the flaking and crusting duff at my feet, Smoot and Runyon and August Bender still in the black pulse of the earth, cloud gouache over the tree line, Mount Caribou massive and on the rise, and taking it in. And taking it back to the future we occupied, and will wake to again, ourselves and our children's children, snug in our monk's robes, pushing the collie hoods back, ready to walk out into the same night and the meadow grass, in step and on time. Can you hear me back there? I don't think you can you? That was such a great poem. I'm really sorry that you can't hear me. No, really, I'm serious. Can you hear me in the last row? Thank you. This is a longer poem, not that long, 41 pages. It's called California Dreaming, which is the last poem I wrote before we left California to come to Virginia over 30 years ago. Of course, the title is from a very famous song by the Mamas and Papas from the 60s called California Dreaming. We are not born yet, and everything's crystal under our feet. We are not brethren, we are not underlings. We are another nation, living by voices that you will never hear, caught in the net of splendor of time to come on the earth. We shine in our distant chambers. We're golden. Mid-morning in Darvon, dustfall off the Pacific stuns us to ecstasy. October sun stuck like a tack on the eastern drift of the sky, the idea of God on the other, body by body rinsed in the Sunday prayer light, draining away into the undercoating and slow sparks of the west, which is our solitude and our joy. I've looked at this ridge of lights for 6 years now and still don't like it. Strung out like Good Friday along a cliff that easters down to the ocean, a dark wing with ruffled feathers as far out as Catalina, fallen from some sky, ruffled and laid back by the wind, Santa Ana that lifts its hot breath on the neck of everything. What if the soul indeed is outside the body? A little rainfall of light moistening our every step, prismatic, apotheosizic. What if inside the body another shape is waiting to come out, white as a quilt, loose as a fever, and sways in the easy tides there? What other anagogue in this life but the self? What other ladder to paradise but the smooth handholds of the rib cage? High in the palm tree, the orioles twitter and grieve. We twitter and grieve. The spider twirls the honeybee, who twitters and grieves around in her net, then draws it by one leg up to the fishbone fern leaves inside the pepper tree, swaddled in silk, and turns it again and again until it is shining. Some nights when the rock and roll band next door has quit playing and the last helicopter is thwonked back to the Marine base and the dark lets all its weight down to within a half inch of the ground, I sit outside in the gold lame of the moon as the town sleeps and the country sleeps like flung confetti around me, and wonder just what in the hell I'm doing out here, so many thousands of miles away from what I know best. And what I know best has nothing to do with Point Conception or Avalon and the long erasure of ocean out there where the landscape ends. What I know best is a little thing. It sits on the far side of the simile, the like that's like the like. Today is sweet stuff on the tongue. The question of how we should live our lives in this world will find no answer from us this morning. Sun flick, the ocean humping its back beneath us, shivering out wave after wave we fall from and cut through in a white scar of healed waters. Our wetsuits gloss slick as seals, our boards grown sharp as cries. We rise and fall like the sun. Ghost of the Muse in her dog's body, suspended above the beach, November 25th. Sun like a Valium disc, smog like rust in the trees. White-hooded and friar-backed, a gold choir eyeballs the wave reach. Invisibly pistoned, the sea keeps it up, plunges and draws back, plunges and draws back. Yesterday hung like a porcelain cup behind the eyes. Sonorous vowels, insistent extremities, the worm creeping out of the heart. Who are these people we pretend to be, untouched by the setting sun? They stand less stiffly than we do and handsomer, first on the left foot and then the right. Just for a moment we see ourselves inside them, peering out, and then they go their own way and we go ours. Back to the window seat above the driveway, Christmas lights and the pepper tree, Black Madonna gazing out from the ailanthus, chalk eyes downcast, heavy with weeping and bitterness. Her time has come round again. Piece by small piece, the world falls away from us like spores from a milkweed pod. And everything we have known and everyone we have known is taken away by the wind to forgetfulness. Somebody always humming, California Dreaming. This is called Under the Nine Trees in January. In our backyard in Charlottesville, at one time there were 21 fruit trees planted by the people who had fixed the house up before us and sold it to us. But apparently, one of them had been kind of nasty to the people who were putting the trees in and the lawn and the landscape in back there. And so they put all the fruit trees inside coffee cans and planted them. So one by one, they all died. We went from 21 to 9, and then we went down to none. But I got in there when there was still 9. And that's what this poem is about. Last night's stars and last night's wind are west of the mountains now and east of the river. Here under the branches of the 9 trees, how small the world looks. Should we lament in winter our shadow solitude, our names spelled out like snowflakes? Where is it written, the season's decrease diminishes me? Should we long for stillness, a hush for the trivial body washed in the colors of paradise, dirt-colored, water-colored, match flame, and wind-colored? As one who has never understood the void, should I give counsel to the darkness, honor the condor's wing? Should we keep on bowing to an inch of this and an inch of that? The world is a handkerchief. Today I spread it across my knees. Tomorrow they'll fold it into my breast pocket, white on my dark suit. If I have a suit. Hope to be buried in Levi's. This poem is called Jesuit Graves. My wife and I were in Ireland in 1995, in Dublin, and our friend, the dear, missed, beloved Seamus Heaney, took us out to the cemetery to see the grave of Gerard Manley Hopkins, whom I was a great admirer of and still am, the Jesuit priest and poet. Being a Jesuit society, it's very unprepossessing. They have the 3 most recent graves and then a long list of all the people from the order from time back on a marble plinth. Oh, when I got back to Seamus's house, I told his wife, Marie, I said, you won't believe what Seamus did for us. He drove us all the way out to the cemetery to see Hopkins's grave. She said, sure, he does that for everybody. So there you go. Midsummer, Irish overcast, oatmeal-colored sky, the Jesuit pit, last mass for hundreds of whose names are incised on the marble wall above the gravel and grassless dirt. Just dirt and the small stones. How strict, how self-effacing. Not suited for you, however, farther bird of paradise, whose plumage of far wonder is not formless and not faceless, whatever you might have hoped for once. Glasnevin Cemetery, Dublin, 3 July 1995. For those who would rise to meet their work, that work is scaffolding. Sacrifice is the cause of ruin. The absence of sacrifice is the cause of ruin. Thus the legends instruct us. North wind through the flat-leaved limbs of the sheltering trees, 3 desperate mounds in the small square enclosure, souls God-gulped and heaven-hidden. P. Gerardus Hopkins, 28 July 1844, 8 June 1889, age 44. And then the next name, and then the next, soldiers of misfortune, lockstep into a star-colored tight dissolve. History's hand-me-ons. But you, farther candescence, you, farther fire, whatever rises comes together, they say. They say. And one last poem from this. I've tried to pick poems that, all my books seem to be one long poem that just runs together, going from book to book to book to book. And I've tried to pick out poems that are maybe part of that flow, but can stand individually as well. This one's called American Twilight. Of course, the long meditation is where all the power lies, so tough luck for you guys. American Twilight. Why do I love the sound of children's voices in unknown games so much on a summer's night? Lightning bugs lifting heavily out of the dry grass like alien spacecraft looking for higher ground. Darkness beginning to sift like coffee grains over the neighborhood. Whunk of a ball being kicked. Surf suck and surf spill from traffic along the bypass. American Twilight. Venus just lit in the third heaven. Time tick between, okay, let's go, and this earth is not my home. What do I care about this? Whatever happens will happen with or without us, with or without these verbal amulets. In the first ply in the heaven of the moon, a little light, half light over Charlottesville. Trees reshape themselves, the swallows disappear, lawn sprinklers do the wave. Nevertheless, it's still summer. Cicadas pump their boxes. Jack Russell Terriers, as they say, start barking their heads off. And someone, somewhere, is putting his first foot, then the second, down on the other side. No hand to help him, no tongue to wedge its wheel. This is called Relics, Relics, R-E-L-I-C-S. I got too close to Relics. Oh, Aldo Buzzi was an Italian writer who wrote a wonderful book called Journey to the Land of the Flies about Sicily. And I enjoyed reading him immensely when I was in Italy. After a time, Hoss, it makes such little difference, what anyone writes. Relics, it seems, of the thing are always stronger than the thing itself. Palimpsest and pentimento, for instance, saints' bones or saints' blood, transcendent architecture of what was possible, say, once upon a time. The dogwoods bloom, the pink ones and the white ones in blots and splotches across the dusk, like clouds perhaps, mock clouds in a mock heaven, the faint odor of something unworldly or otherworldly, lingering in the darkness, then not, as though some saint had passed by the side yard. The odor of paradise, as Aldo Buzzi has it, odor of heaven, the faithful say. And what is this odor like? Someone who'd smelled it was asked once. He had no answer and said, it doesn't resemble any flower or any bloom or spice on this earth. I wouldn't know how to describe it. Lingering as the dark comes on. St. Gaspare del Bufalo was one of these fragrant saints. Buzzi continues, St. Gaspare who walked in the rain without an umbrella and still stayed dry. Miraculous gift. He knew he added one of the saint's relatives, a pianist who served him an osso buco once in a penthouse in Milano. Let's see. A cold spring in Charlottesville, end of April 2000. If you can't say what you've got to say in 3 lines, better change your style. Nobody's born redeemed. Nobody's moonlight, golden fuse in the deadly trees. White wind through black wires humming a speech we do not speak. Listen for us in the dark hours. Listen for us in our need. This is a poem called Body and Soul, dedicated to Coleman Hawkins, a saxophone player who, it is said, I've been told, recorded the first free-form jazz record of this particular song in 1939. This poem is pretty free-form too, so that's fine. The world's body is not our body, although we'd have it so. Our body's not infinite, although this afternoon, under the underwater slant shine of sunlight and cloud shadow, it almost seems that way in the wind, a wind that comes from the world away with its sweet breath and its tart tongue and casts us loose like a cloud, heaven-ravaged, blue pocket, small change for the hand. I used to think the power of words was inexhaustible, that how we said the world was how it was and how it would be. I used to imagine that word sway and word thunder would silence the silence and all that words were the word, that language could lead us inexplicably to grace as though it were geographical. I used to think these things when I was young. I still do. Some poems exist still on the other side of our lives and shine out, but we'll never see them. They are unutterable in a language without an alphabet, unseen, world-long bone music. Too bad. We'd know them by heart if we could summer them out in our wounds. Too bad. Listening hard. Clouds, of course, are everywhere and blue sky in between. Blue sky. Then what comes after the blue? Our lives, it turns out, are still lifes. Glass bottles and fruit, dead animals, flowers, the edges of this and that, which drop off most often to indeterminate vacancy. We're beautiful and hung up to dry. Outside the frame, mountains are moving, rivers flash, a cloud-scrumbled sky, field patches nudge up to comfort us. A train crosses a trestle. Across the room, someone gets up and rearranges the things. Insubstantial as smoke, our words drum down like fingertips across the page, leaving no smudge or mark. Unlike our purloined selves, they will not rise from the dead. Unlike our whimpers and prayers, they lie low and disappear. This word, that word, all fall down. How far from heaven the stars are. How far the heart from the page. We don't know what counts. It's as simple as that, isn't it? We just don't know what counts. Midwinter in Charlottesville, soul shunt and packed down, crumbs snow-flecked across the backyard, then gone on the sun's tongue. These are the 4 lessons I've learned. 1 from Martha Graham, 3 others from here and there. Walk as though you've been given 1 brown eye and 1 blue. Think as though you thought best with somebody else's brain. Write as though you had in hand the last pencil on earth. Pray as though you were praying with somebody else's soul. And then, because I can't stop once I get hold of something I like, this is called Body and Soul 2, also dedicated to Coleman Hawkins, and you know the rest of it. The structure of landscape is infinitesimal, like the structure of music, seamless, invisible. Even the rain has larger sutras. What holds the landscape together and what holds music together is faith, it appears. Faith of the eye, faith of the ear. Nothing like that in language, however. Clouds chugging from west to east like blossoms blown by the wind. April and anything's possible. Here is the story of Swan Sung, a Buddhist monk. He went from Xi'an to southern India and back, on horseback, on camelback, on elephant back, and on foot. 10,000 miles it took him, from 629 to 645. Mountains and deserts in search of the truth, the heart of reality, the law that would help him escape it and all its attendant and inescapable suffering. And he found it. These days I look at things, not through them, and sit down low as far away from the sky as I can get. The reef of the weeping cherry flourishes coral. The neighbor's back porch light bulbs glow like anemones. Squid-eyed Venus floats forth overhead. This is the half hour, half light, half dark, when everything starts to shine out and aphorisms skulk in the trees, their wings folded, their heads bowed. Every true poem is a spark and aspires to the condition of the original fire arising out of the emptiness. It is that same emptiness it wants to reignite. It is that same engendering it wants to be re-engendered by. Shooting stars, April's identical, celestial, wordless, burning down. Its light is the light we commune by. Its destination's our own. Its hope is the hope we live with. Wang Wei, on the other hand, before he was 30 years old, bought his famous estate on the Wang River just east of the east end of the southern mountains and lived there off and on for the rest of his life. He never traveled the landscape, but stayed inside it, a part of nature himself, he thought. And who would say no to someone so bound up in solitude, in failure, he thought, in suffering? Afternoon, the color of cream of wheat, a small dollop of butter lazily at the western edge. Getting too old and lazy to write poems, I watch the snowfall from the apple trees. Landscape, as Wang Wei said, softens the sharp edges of isolation. Don't just do something, sit there. And so I have. The seasons curling around me like smoke, gone to the end of the earth and back without a sound. I'm going to make it the business of mine to write one poem without the word cloud in it. I probably won't succeed. Oh, God. This poem is an elegy for my brother-in-law, Tim McIntyre, who died at the age of 42 or 43, about 20 years ago. He was a brilliant young man, the funniest guy I ever met in my life. He was an actor, a musician. He could do anything, especially drink and take cocaine, unfortunately. And this is the last line of the poem is the last line of a song of his called It's a Long Way. sun-saddled, coke-copping, bad boozing blues. Front porch of the first cabin with Luke. July most likely and damp, both of us wearing rubber boots. Just out of the photograph beyond the toe of my left foot, the railing where Tim and I one afternoon carved our poor initials while working on verses for his song, Stockman's Bar Again, Boys. Both song and singer are gone now, and the railing too. We all sang in the chorus back in L.A. in the recording studio, Holly and I and Bill Myers and Kelly and Johnny Rubenstein. Such joyful music so long ago, before the coke crash and the whiskey blows. Sun-soured Montana daydreams. Los Angeles in its dark snood so soft on the neck. Lie still, I'm working on it. Lie still. Billy Mitchell's just come by, somebody stole his tools. Leland Driggs has shot an elk and broke the county's rules. Sweet Dan Kelly's on his cat, watch out and back away. Snuffy Bruns is feeding squirrels and Crash is bucking hay. Big John Phelan's got outside a half a fifth of gin, and we've all gone and gotten drunk in Stockman's Bar again. Dead frequency, Slick, over and out. It's mostly a matter of what kind of noise you make. American Hot Wax, for instance, and Stand By Your Man, George Jones, typecasting for sure. And music, always music, keyboard and guitar, violin, anything with a string. Your band was called Fun Zone. You up front, Poncher on drums, Wolfie on bass, and Johnny R. at the piano. And others, until the lights went out. Renaissance boy with coke up your nose and marijuana in your eye, we loved you the best we could, but nobody loved you enough, except Miss Whiskey. You roll in your sweet baby's arms now, as once you said you would, and lay your body down in your meadow, in the mountains, all alone. This is called Bedtime Story. The generator hums like a distant dong and zeek. It's early evening and time, like the dog it is hungry for food. And we'll be fed, don't doubt it. We'll be fed, my small one. The forest begins to gather its silences in. The meadow regroups and hunkers down for its cleft feet. Something is wringing the rag of sunlight inexorably out and hanging. Something is making the reeds bend and cover their heads. Something is licking the shadows up and stringing the blank spaces along, filling them in. Something is inching its way into our hearts, scratching its blue nails against the wall there. Should we let it in? Should we greet it as it deserves, hands on our ears, mouths open? Or should we bring it a chair to sit on and offer it meat? Should we turn on the radio? Should we clap our hands and dance the something dance, the welcoming something dance? I think we should, love. I think we should. Time will tell. Time was when time was not, in the world an uncut lawn ready for sizing. We looked and took the job in hand. Birds burst from our fingers, cities appeared, and small towns in the interim. We loved them all. In distant countries, tides nibbled our 2 feet on pebbly shores with their soft teeth and languorous tongues. Words formed and flew from our fingers. We listened and loved them all. Now finitude looms like antimatter. not this and not that. And everywhere, like a presence one bumps into, oblivious, unwittingly. Excuse me, I beg your pardon, but time has no pardon to beg and no excuses. The wind in the meadow grasses, the wind through the rocks bends and breaks whatever it touches. And never the same wind in the same spot, but it's still the wind and blows in its one direction, northwest to southeast, an ointment upon the skin, a little saliva, time with its murderous gums and pale, windowless throat, its mouth pressed to our mouths, pushing the breath in, pulling it out. I don't think that had a cloud in it, I'm not sure. This one's called, "Well, Get Up Rounder, Let a Working Man Lay Down." It's a line from a song by a lot of people. Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs is where I got it from. The kingdom of minutia, that tight place where most of us live, is the kingdom of the saved, those who exist between the cracks, those just under the details. When the hand comes down, the wing-white hand, we are the heads of hair and finger bones yanked out of their shoes. We are the rapture's children. As I said once, I can just see all the doors of the houses of the Episcopalians opening and them coming out and saying, "Where in the hell did everybody go? What are those shoes doing out there?" I'm an Episcopalian, it's okay. Where did everybody go? With Horace sitting on the platform waiting for the Robert E. Lee. That's a great title. The poem's not so good, but when you get to the point that your titles are more interesting than your poems, you know you should have laid your pencil down. Sitting on the platform. Horace had a farm outside of Rome and spent all his time there, most of his time there. 70 years and what's left, or better still, what's gone before. A couple of lines, a day or two out in the cold, and all those books, those half-baked books, sweet yeast for the yellow dust. What say, Orazio? Like you, I'm sane and live at the edges of things. Countryside flooded with light, sundown, the chaos of future mornings just over the ridge, but not here yet. Oh God, let's see. Yeah. I shall be released. There's a consolation beyond nomenclature of what is past or is about to pass, though I don't know what it is. But someone, somewhere, must. And this is addressed to him. Come on, Long Eyes, crack the book. Thumb through the pages and stop at the one with the golden script. Breathe deeply and lay it on me, that character with the luminous half-life. And one last one here. When the horses gallop away from us, it's a good thing. I always find it strange, though I shouldn't, how creatures don't care for us the way we care for them. Horses, for instance, and chipmunks, and any bird you'd name. Empathy's only a one-way street. And that's all right, I've come to believe. It sets us up for ultimate things, and penultimate ones as well. It's a good lesson to have in your pocket when the call comes to call. I've got 3 or 4 more here, a short one. This one's called Grace 2, which presupposes a Grace 1, which in fact exists. Somewhere back there in all those books, half-baked books for the yellow dust. It's true, the aspirations of youth burn down to char strips with the years. Tonight, only memories are my company and my grace. How nice if they could outlive us, but they can't or won't. No Indian summer for us. It's rough and it's growing dark. The sunset pulling the full moon up by its long fingernails. It's better this way. The unforgiven are pure, as are the unremembered. I love 2s and 3s and 4s. Actually, I went on up to 6 several times. This is called Sentences 2. Last chapter, last verse. Everything's brown now in the golden field. The threshing floor of the past is past. The over-mountain men of the future lie cusped in their little boxes. The sun backs down over the ridgeline at 5 after 7. The landscape puts on its black mask and settles into its sleeplessness. The fish will transpose it, half for themselves, half for the water 10,000 miles away at the end of the darkening stream. To live a pure life, to live a true life, is to live the life of an insect. And 2 more, if I can find this. Oh, yes. I'm just about in step and on time. Shadow and Smoke. I attribute this thing to Che Guevara because that's where I read it, but it seems to me it's got to be a Japanese coin from at least 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Live your life as though you are already dead, Che Guevara declared. Okay, let's see how that works. Not much different as far as I can see. The earth, the same paradise it's always wanted to be. Heaven as far away as before. The clouds, the same old movable gates since time began. There is no circle. There is no sentiment to be broken. There are only the songs of young men and the songs of old men, hoping for something elsewise. Disabuse them in their ignorance, Lord. Tell them the shadows are already gone, the smoke already cleared. Tell them that light is never a metaphor. And the poem I always close my readings with, I've never read it before in my life. But it seems like I should close the reading with this. It's called Lullaby. I've said what I had to say as melodiously it was given to me. I've said what I had to say as far down as I could go. I've been everywhere I wanted to but Jerusalem, which doesn't exist. So I guess it's time to depart, time to go, time to meet those you've never met, time to say goodnight. Grant us silence, grant us no reply, grant us shadows and their cohorts, stealth across the sky. Thank you all very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.